Hello, welcome to the Archaeology of Connecticut. I'm Glenda Rose, President of Friends of the Office of State Archaeology, here with State Archaeologist Sarah Sportman, former FOSA President Scott Brady, and a panel of exciting guests who Sarah will introduce shortly. Today's program is going to be a real potpourri of superlatives that will be a lot of fun. I'm sure that those of us who are not formally trained archaeologists have all had an experience or find that sparked our interest and probably tops our best, most mysterious, most exciting list. So it will be really interesting to hear from the professionals about their best and worst. Now here's Sarah to introduce our guests and get the conversation started.
Hi, everybody, and thanks for joining us tonight. We're really excited to be joined by a great panel of archaeologists, people that I've known and worked with for a long time. You're going to find a lot of overlap in this group, I think, in some of our experiences, but I think that'll make it more fun. So I think, the best way to start maybe is to just go around the room and have everybody on the panel introduce themselves and get started by giving us your name, what you do, and how you got involved in archaeology.
Hi, my name is Stephanie Scialo. I have been an archaeologist in the eastern states for the last 8 years. I am currently pursuing my PhD at the University of Connecticut. Thank you, Scott. I got into archaeology because I needed extra credits when I was in undergrad, and someone told me that I could get 6 summer credits. So I went for it. I fell in love with it. I was offered my first job directly out of it, and I have been in the business ever since.
Great. Well, hi, everybody. I'm Bill Farley, and first-time listener multiple times. I've been on the show a few times, so I'm an old pro. Anyway, so you're going to start to hear some overlap in these stories for sure. I've been an archaeologist in Connecticut for 15 years now, believe it or not, and I'm an associate professor at Southern Connecticut State University now. But like so many others on the panel, I got my start at UConn as well. I did my undergraduate at UConn, and I went to school to be a journalist, dodged that bullet, but took an anthropology class as a general education, and it happened to be taught by the great Nicholas Bellantoni at the time, then the state archaeologist, and he was just this really inspiring person that if anybody listening has ever met him before, and so that got me interested. I was like, I love history, but this is like history, but I don't have to be locked in a basement with dusty books. I can go out and do some cool stuff. And then I took a field school, which was actually partially taught by Dr. Sarah Sportman, who at the time was a graduate student, and met over the years a lot of the people you're going to hear in just a second, and that's been my journey. So thanks.
My name is Eric Heffter. I am a senior archaeologist with Archaeological and Historical Services Incorporated, a CRM firm out of Storrs, Connecticut. And how did I get involved in archaeology? Well, I sort of fell into it. Same sort of thing as with Bill there. My first semester at UConn, I took Intro to Anthropology class with Dr. Nick, and I enjoyed the class so much that I started to take more anthropology classes, and then that kind of turned more into archaeology. And also took my field school with Dr. Sportman. In fact, Bill and I were in the same field school.
These are all the same classes, I think, yeah.
Well, I was going to say, what year did you take Dr. Nick's class? Was it fall 2004?
Yeah, we were in the same class.
We were, yeah. I was going to say,
it was
I don't remember,
lecture,
but yeah.
So we wouldn't have known each other. But we were later on, we were roommates while working together doing CRM. So, that's yep.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, it's a small world.
It is.
Hey, I'm Mandy Ranslow. I work for a small federal agency called the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation. I am an archaeologist who now has a desk job for the last 10 years, but I got my undergraduate at Boston University and then did my graduate degree at UConn, where I met all these fine folks. And I have been a member of FOSA since 1998 when I was in high school, and that was pretty much my start in archaeology by joining FOSA, but also being part of the Greater New Haven Archaeological Society, which is no longer in existence, and I would do digs with them in high school. And I've known Sarah for quite some time through grad school as well.
Yeah, Mandy started so young that the treasurer eventually complained, how can this person still be a student and paying the student rate to be a member of FOSA? Because she started in high school.
And then undergrad, and then grad school. There was a lot of being a student.
Yes, the student price is actually grandfathered in.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, just so everybody knows, this is a special edition of Archaeology of Connecticut where it's called our Superlative Show. So the superlatives will vary, but each topic has a superlative in it. And then we'll start with our state archaeologist, and she'll lead by example by serving up a response to each topic. And then we'll go around the table as you guys are ready to jump in, okay? So it's all up to you. It's free form. We're just going to have some fun, and it feels like you guys know each other pretty well. So we're off and running. So I'm going to start with one that, look, we love this program. We love better understanding, our collective arc by what you guys do and what you find. But to us, an artifact or a find is a portal through which you can go back, you can journey for hundreds and hundreds or thousands and thousands of years. So with that, let's start with the coolest find that you've been a part of. The coolest find.
That is a really hard question. There's so many things. But I do say before I answer, I want to say that Scott and Glenda should also jump in on these if they have good stories.
Yeah,
because
there's no dodging this stuff.
You guys don't just get to sit here and listen to us. So I guess I would say that some of the coolest things I found have actually come about in the last few years of my career. And they're things we've talked about here on this site. On this show. I have to say, being part of the excavations at Avon and finding the earliest indigenous site in Connecticut was one of the coolest things ever. I also think that I'm going to leave it at that. I think Avon was the coolest so far.
All right, who wants to jump in?
I've got a good one that actually kind of sparked how I felt about archaeology. When I was doing my field school, we were testing a river terrace where we didn't find anything. Like 2 weeks, we didn't find
That's so
anything.
unusual.
No. I remember Zach Singer was like, this is how archaeology goes. And I happened to open up a hole and opened up directly onto what's called a cache of points. So I found one point, and I called Zach over, being the excited field school student, and I was like, I found a point, and he had to come all the way down this hill, and then he walked all the way back up the hill, and I kept digging down. I found another point, and I said, Zach, you gotta come see this. So he comes back down, he looks at it, he goes, oh, cool, a second one. He walks all the way back up the hill. By the fourth point, he was back. And he was like, I'm just going to stay. But what was really interesting about that is because it's what I like to call a moment in time find, because someone probably based on the points 3,000 years ago buried a bag of tools, and that's where they stayed until we found them a couple years ago. And that was really awesome. I remember Dr. Kevin McBride came out and he said, well, I've never found something like this, and you'll never find anything cooler. And considering I was on the Avon site with you, Sarah, I think that I've proven that false as well.
It's sort of unfair for your field school because then you're hooked and you're kind of stuck in this career track forever.
Yeah, I think it was destiny, really. But, following that, I had so many empty test pits that I think my penance was fulfilled.
Fair enough.
Who's got one?
Mine's also kind of a moment in time sort of one. One of the projects that the company is doing right now is a big sort of data recovery project at the mouth of the Connecticut River. And one of the cool things that we've really found is, a lot of times when you're digging, you just find sort of random stuff. The plow has basically sort of, destroyed any sort of connection between the things. But one of the cool things that we found at this site is basically you could say a pile of quartz cobbles, which itself doesn't sound very interesting, but these quartz cobbles are actually, some of them are napped, which means that, pieces of them have been removed, which would then be used to make stone tools like projectile points or arrowheads or whatever you want to call them. And it's just unusual to find something like that intact. And what also makes it really cool is that you can actually sort of see the process. A lot of times you either kind of get a finished artifact or you get like little pieces or something like that. But I can see here, we got a pile of cobbles. Somebody put them there. They, had taken a few and knocked some flakes off, then returned them. And it's just amazing to sort of just, spatially be able to see that kind of activity.
Do you think they're like tested cobbles? Just sort of like, nah, No.
Oh yeah, they're definitely tested. I mean, that's one of the other cool things. You kind of don't want to, get into the whole, if I was doing this, I would X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
But it is one of those things where I look at the cobbles, they're about nice hand size, and the number of cobbles that are in these piles, it's kind of like the number that you'd be able to comfortably sort of carry with you.
That's cool.
Yeah, so it's just kind of like, wow, amazing.
Yeah, I think mine is more current. It's when Brian Jones started working on the Hollister site, Brian always had ideas. He was an idea man, and he immediately kind of had this. There's a real different native Europe, English kind of contact going on here, and. So we've been teased with that over the years since we started back in 2016, and then this summer, in one of the units in one of the older looking cellars, we found, I think there's up to 15, 20 pieces of wampum.
I think more than 20 now.
Yeah, might even be more. And so then it's like, well, okay, maybe they're trading wampum with the native people, and then we found what looks to be a metal drill. Well, maybe they're making wampum. And then we found a broken piece of wampum that, again, Dr. McBride's kind of looked at it and said, that fractured while it was being drilled. So, we have now, on top of all these other pieces that we've had to connect native people to this European farm, someone is there making wampum, and lots of it. So, again, a moment in time that's captured that maybe telling us a story that's a little different than what went on in a lot of places here in the Northeast, which I think is pretty amazing.
Yeah, and the other cool thing about that, just to add, is it's not just the beads. Like, we have the whole toolkit. We've got whetstones, we've got an iron drill, we've got the shell raw material that are kind of broken off for the purple parts. We've got a whelk shell missing, the columella. So it's all there together in one little context, and it's impossible for really to interpret it in any other way. So it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, I think it's pretty amazing.
I'm not going to single anybody out, but okay, all right. You don't always have to have an answer. How about funniest moment on a dig? Funniest field moment.
I got one that's kind of a build off the last ones that I didn't share on the last one too. So
Does it involve a machete?
No. Oh no. No, we can't talk about machetes. No, I can't talk about. I'm legally not allowed to talk about machetes. No, it's actually from building on the theme of connections of this little group here. But when Eric and I were undergraduates, and Sarah and Mandy were graduate students, one of the ways that graduate students get their dissertation work done is they bribe undergraduates to come and dig for them for free. And so Sarah used to have us come up with her in the summers to upstate New York, and we would camp out it was actually a lot of fun. We'd go camping and stay for like a week or two up at this neat 19th century site in upstate New York and do digs. I just remember working. That's had both my coolest artifact and a funny story. The cool artifact being working in you might remember this, Sarah, working in an overseer's yard, and we found a gold band that we interpreted was probably a wedding band.
Yeah.
And that was such a cool story in your mind of how did that happen? Did someone lose that while gardening or throw it out a window? I don't know. You could tell all kinds of funny stories. But the funny story, I think, was another cache story like your stuff, where that was Eric and I think were working on this test pit together, and we found a cache of smoking pipe bowls. And in the 19th century, smoking pipe bowls got really complicated, and some of them have faces on them. They have these faces of sometimes like political figures. They were used as political propaganda, like presidential figure or Grover Cleveland pipe. It's kind of a wild experience. And we found we had this one test pit where we found like, I don't know. Do you remember this? We found like, well, maybe it wasn't.
I remember it.
I remember. I think Eric was there that day too. I know Sarah was, and we found probably like 15 or 20 of these pipes, and some of them were just so funny. These whole like ridiculous faces on these pipes, and they're facing you while you're smoking them, so you're looking at this person's face the whole time you're smoking the pipe. What a strange artifact. Anyway, that's my little. So those were cool days.
Who's got the funniest moment? Anybody else want to jump in?
I've got one from when I used to work for a larger company, and we would walk miles out to do test pits. And we were in Massachusetts, and a massive snow and ice storm came, like 2 feet of snow, and the company still sent us out. And we had a crew chief, and he was just the grumpiest guy. You couldn't get a laugh out of him, and life was so difficult, right? And he didn't want us to walk up this really snowy hill. It's a big hill. And he disappears up to the top of the hill, doesn't want us to come up. He gets back to the top of the hill, and he goes, "There's no reason to test up here." And then he disappears for a minute. And next thing I know, I'm watching him throw himself down the hill and like penguin belly slide down the hill with his backpack on, but with the sternest look on his face. Like there was no joy. And he gets to the bottom of the hill, he picks himself up, dusts him off, and he goes, "Okay, let's go home." And I was like, there's something in there. There's something in there.
It was an efficient way to get down the hill. That's all.
So it has nothing to do with archaeology, but I think about that because his face was just so stoic.
Yeah.
I think funniest is a hard one in some ways because it's very contextual. Like it's sort of, there's a lot of you gotta be there stories that involve like heat stress and like, just ridiculous things that have been happening for the day. I've been trying to like think of a couple, but I can't.
Yeah, I'm that embarrassing guy, and it's happened more than once, so I don't know which one of them was the funniest. But I'm the guy that, when the hole starts to get deep, instead of standing up to move the rocks out of the hole, if you just throw them, they'll be far enough away. That doesn't always work, And there's been several occasions where it's rolled right back in and smacked me right on the top of the head, mostly unseen. So, I could pretend it didn't happen. But if I'm being truthful, that's me. That's the kind of thing that I do in the field. That, as long as I don't end up with a concussion, it's pretty funny.
The funny ones, yeah, they're so tough, especially too because there's some where we really can't talk about them on the radio,
Yeah.
But I was going to say your story kind of triggered one for me where I remember doing shovel test pits, and you have someone who's actually digging the hole and you have someone who, basically screens all the dirt that's coming out. And of course, we're in New England, right? So there's rocks everywhere, including very big cobbles. And one of the things I just remember was the person that I was digging with, usually what you want to do is a big cobble or something. You want to kind of, push it off to the side. You don't want to put it into the screen because it can break the screen. We call them screen breakers. And what this guy did is he, took a shovel of soil with a big cobble as well. But instead of taking the cobble and just laying it aside, he just very gingerly, with his shovel, put it into the screen. It's just like, okay, well, I guess I can screen this, maybe. I don't know. It's just one of those things where it's like kind of frustrating, but now I always think about that whenever I'm like doing a shovel test pit and I think about all the rocks and it's just like, oh, okay,
We should start a band called the Screen Breakers. Yeah, that's our new band name here.
I will say the other thing is, and it again happened on several occasions, we use these big steel pins to mark the corners of units, and we could have a whole line of units going across, and at the end of the season you like to leave those corners in on those big blocks to help you find it and where you continue. And I've realized, I think Sarah had this happen this year and I've had it happen more than once, by not being clear on what the helpers, to the volunteers, what we're doing. You're walking and they're walking right behind you, pulling out every single pin.
So the funniest moment on a dig that I didn't participate in, for me, happened in our studio at 108 Main Street. We had been hyping this, LRB and myself, on air for about a week and a half. And it was you guys going locally to learn more about the ivory business in and around our area. And Scott and Sarah showed up to do their show after having stayed and worked and been on their knees. And they were filthy. Actually, they were covered in dirt. This is Pigpen times 10. They were both coming in, and not that our studio is ever all that clean, but it was that day because LRB helped out and cleaned up and all this stuff. And then you guys walk in, and it's just like, okay, we got to clean. And I go, hey, how was the dig? I was all enthusiastic. We're about to go on air, and if you could see the expletives in your thought bubbles, you didn't say anything, but it was actually a funny moment because nothing happened. You found absolutely nothing.
Now,
Glass, I think.
now what we teach the students in field school, like I think has kind of been alluded to here, even finding nothing tells you something.
Right, negative information is still
information.
Yeah.
That's what we
Which,
tell
by the way, is the
Does
worst
anybody
thing
buy
you
that?
hear at the end of the day.
Which is sort of the same thing as like telling people it's good luck when it rains on their wedding day. Or something, right? It's
Exactly
the same
like
idea.
Well, so with that, how about setting up a most disappointing effort in the field? This is like the biggest letdown. There's like, I thought I had something. We thought that something was going to happen, and because you guys had every intention, you thought something was going to happen right here in our backyard. Actually, unveiling some, trying to learn more about the ivory trade and the ivory business, and you came up with not a thing.
Yeah, I will say the lack of information was important because it kind of led to the idea that, if you go and look what they're doing with the ivory, then they're using it all up. All the scraps they grind up and use as fertilizer. This was a really smart business model that there was no waste at all. So maybe we shouldn't have been surprised that we didn't find anything.
Interesting. And anybody on most disappointing effort?
I do have one that I involved Scott with tangentially when I worked at the Department of Transportation here in Connecticut in my last job. Part of my job was to look at project sites and determine whether we needed to do an archaeological survey or not. And I had this project for an expansion of a public facility north of Hartford, or in the north end of Hartford. And I had it on some reliable sources through oral history that there was a chance that at this parcel, the circus animals might have been buried that had died in the Hartford circus fire. And Scott, forgive me, I don't remember what year that was. Do you remember roughly off the top of your head?
Yeah, it was during the war, about 42, 43, maybe 44.
Okay, so anyway, I mobilized our consultant archaeologist to go out there because, God forbid, I don't want the construction to start and they pull out some elephant skull or something else. Anyway, ended up being a complete bust. We found absolutely nothing, but I guess at the end of the day, I was relieved to be able to clear that parcel to go under construction. But I don't know, maybe I was a little disappointed we didn't have any interesting finds from that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get that.
I mean, you find an elephant skeleton, I think you would really know it, right? I mean,
Yeah,
we found horses
right.
and cows before. I don't think an elephant died there, though, and it was a little later
You're
than
right.
that. Sorry, it wasn't the 40s. It was a little later than that.
This is more of a routine disappointment, actually, because we work in New England. So we work in New England, and it gets cold, and a lot of times in New England we also find quartz, which is white and clear. There's crystal quartz, and there's been a lot of times where you go out and you're finding artifacts, and someone will bag up a bunch of quartz flakes, and you get back to the lab, and all you have is a bag of water, And so I call them fool's flakes. But it's funny because some people say, oh, that's a new archaeologist problem, but anybody can do it because you're wearing gloves, it's cold, you're miserable, and you're just happy to find something, and you get back to the lab and, well, it's washed already because it doesn't exist. So yeah, that's always a funny one for the winter.
Yeah, I was going to mention another one of those daily, those normal, everyday sort of regrets, which is in New England or anywhere probably, where you find a great feature, which is like a nice soil stain, maybe a post mold or a hearth or something exciting, and you take hours carefully drawing, excavating, and bisecting, taking samples only to determine that it's like a mole hole or something like that, which it is about, I don't know, 90% of the time. So there's that just feeling of knowledge that this disappointment is likely in your future. So
I think I can give a couple. I think there was one. I'm going to bring Brian into this one because I know there was one when he was still working in cultural resource management where he spent several days carefully excavating what turned out to be like a turtle burrow.
when you find the turtle at the end of it, then that's
Surprise.
I was going to say that's still better than like working on sites and accidentally digging up Fido. Because we have accidentally
yeah.
had a few.
Oh,
we've
I've
accidentally
definitely done that.
a few
Oh, yeah.
times. So
Raise your hand if you've accidentally found somebody's buried.
Yeah.
yeah.
Everybody.
It's everyone.
This is not a visual medium, everybody, so we're going to need to report the votes.
So I have a couple from New York. Well, I guess one is kind of... Well, maybe I'll save one first. Did we do surprising yet? I save one
Not
for
yet.
surprising. So the other one I was going to say for disappointing one was years ago when I was very young working in CRM at probably like 23 or 24 in New York in the Hudson Valley. We were working on this big project for months in Coxsackie, not far from Flint Mine Hill, which is one of the major sources of the chert that is so important across the region. And, we were finding lots of pre-contact artifacts, lithic artifacts, whatever. And then we went to phase 2 and started finding pottery as well, indigenous pottery. We even found like one almost complete crushed pot at the bottom of a unit, which was really cool. So we started expanding out the block and expanding out, and we started finding posts. And so suddenly we're thinking, oh, we're going to have a longhouse. It's going to be so cool. And so for like weeks and weeks and weeks, we were just digging and digging and expanding and expanding. Of course, and we did have like a nice line, and it kind of curve. And then we started digging into the posts, and like the very first one had like a big machine cut nail at the bottom, and it was a fence. It was not a longhouse. It was a fence. But that was pretty disappointing.
All right, we'll move on now. Scott might have given his answer already because the topic is most dangerous field experience, and his is throwing rocks on his own head. But most dangerous field experience, something that that actually is a good piece of information to have, that sometimes things do happen. You guys are out there in the natural world. I mean, things can happen. So what might have been the most dangerous field experience?
Well, I know what Don Brown's was. Don, a friend of ours who was out at Templeton site, another very old paleo kind of period site here in Connecticut. And on the property, there had been some beehives that had been raided by a bear, and there's a nice stream there. And it was really hot, and we were really disgusting, and as we were winding in on the end of the day, so Dawn decided she was going to go down and just kind of freshen up in the stream. And during that interim, somebody pulled out a very interesting flake. So we are all kind of huddled up looking at the flake, and Dawn eventually comes back, and she's a little pissed at us, rightfully so. Didn't you guys hear me yelling? It's like, yeah, but we got this really neat flake here. She's going, there was a bear. I turned around when I was trying to leave the stream, and there's this big bear in the way. Oh my God. So he apparently decided it would be better to leave than to do anything, and she was fine, but we were not exactly very chivalrous in our attitude towards her screaming.
Hilarious.
Well, you were clearly distracted by
a flake. Gotta have priorities.
It wasn't even a point.
No, it wasn't even a point.
I've got a similar story many years ago, working out in the woods, deep in the woods in a site. And when you're way out deep in the woods in the site, they don't there's no flush toilets out there. So when you have to go, you just go. You go away from the site and you find a spot. And I made an error in judgment, which was that the spot I picked was the corner of a fence line. So maybe like a 5-foot fence, pretty tall fence, coming to a point and we're out in the woods. I don't know what this fence line was for. Who knows? But I do my business. And when I turn around, start to head back to the site, there's a big buck right in front of me, maybe 20 feet in front of me, with 8-point big buck. And he has cornered me in the corner of this fence. And we just look at each other, and I'm looking at him, and he's looking at me. And I'm like, I'm going to just try and stay very still here. And this is like this is a T-Rex, and this is and he finally decided, instead of running at me or away from me, because we had sort of cornered each other and he didn't have an easy way to go, he just turned and in one leap went over that fence, 5-foot tall fence, and off into the woods. And I was like, my blood pressure was that was really scary. So he was big, and I definitely freaked him out, and he was not happy that I was there. So
anybody else?
I have something that was potentially dangerous, involved 2 people in this room. We needed to take photos at the end of the dig, and there was no drone or anything available, so somebody backs their truck up and puts a ladder in the back of the truck, and a couple people were standing on it taking pictures. It looked kind of dangerous to me.
As the truck's moving?
No, it wasn't moving. We thought about that to get video, but we chose not to.
It's like we should really just suck it up and buy a drone.
Years ago when I was in New Hampshire, we had a resident cougar on site, and the sheriff for the town basically, like, when he met us, he just goes, yeah, y'all better bring a gun. So we went out there without guns. But one of the girls wound up having a Jurassic Park kind of moment because she was working under a tree. And long story short is they got some sort of idea to look up, and there was a deer in the tree that had been dragged up by the mountain lion.
Oh my goodness.
So we were like, you know what? Because it was a huge deer, and if it's that big of a deer, it is a big mountain lion.
Yeah.
And so we called the company and we said we either need 45s or we need to leave. And the decision was to leave. So
Smart.
Yeah, archaeologists giving a bunch of archaeologists a bunch of guns.
no, it wasn't a good idea.
Yeah. I think most of mine have involved like guns or unexploded ordnance, because I've done a couple of unexploded ordnance projects, and one of them, the more recent one, was in New Hampshire, a New Boston Air Force Station about 10 years ago, and that felt pretty safe. There were very careful unexploded ordnance technicians with us who were, we weren't allowed to dig. We weren't allowed to put a shovel in the ground. It was all surface survey, that kind of thing. But 10 years before that, I was on a project in the Cape, and I think maybe the rules were a little different back then. But they sent us out there with these two guys who were, like, insane. Well, one of them was insane. He introduced himself as Dave the Bomb Guy. And his basic strategy was to, like, follow us around, let us dig a little bit. And then he had this massive metal bar, like this iron bar. And he'd just, like, hey, step back. And then he'd take it and just like slam it into the ground into our test pit, and then be like, you're clear. And then we'd dig another 10 centimeters. And it was like, it was disturbing on some level. I was like 23. What recourse did I have?
What was the game plan if he found a bomb?
I don't know. I was not at a high enough pay grade to like know what the next steps were. We just got some basic training where it was like, if you see one of these, don't touch it. But he was just going to bang on them with a metal bar.
I did a little training and had a little chance to work with some of the bomb squad guys in my previous career, and I don't ever remember anybody jamming the ground with a big metal bar to find explosives.
No. My second time around, it was all like metal detectors and like very careful. I mean, it was certainly a colorful cast of characters, but they were very careful.
Wait, so you said second time. So this is a regular thing that you guys have to consider?
Well, it depends. I mean, there are lots of sites with cultural resources and unexploded ordnance, it turns out. So, like, for example, New Boston Air Force Station in New Hampshire, it actually contains an archaeological district because there's a whole abandoned 18th and 19th century agricultural landscape within the base. So they were doing like their 12th round or something of ordnance mitigation over the last 50 years because it was a training ground in World War II. So they were just dropping mostly practice bombs, but not all practice bombs. So, but I mean, we heard stories that like years before there was a Boy Scout camp out there, and like the kids would play every year a game like who could find the bomb first, like this summer. So I mean, by the time we got around, it was pretty picked over, I think.
So, for instance, you did a program where we got to know who Lieutenant Eugene Bradley was, and we got into the whole process. Nick Bellantoni, I believe, was on that show, master storyteller. But in case people don't know, please get to know why we honor Lieutenant Eugene Bradley by flying out of an airport named after him. Please do that, especially as we're in the month where Veterans Day is approaching. It'd be a welcome thing to do. Anyway, on that dig, was one concerned about unexploded material?
I helped Nick out a little bit with that project later on when there was so they had a site that they had kind of pegged the crash to, and there was an elderly gentleman that had been at the base that was living down in North Carolina, and someone got in touch with him, and he thought it was someplace else. So we were back out there, GPR, and not really digging. Turns out it's really the same place, but in talking with Nick about that, I don't think he had any live ammunition on the plane because it was just a training mission. And I do agree with you. I think that, Bradley is a much more appropriate name, especially when the alternative is Hartford Springfield Airport.
Yeah.
It's just,
it's kind of lame.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I should add in that when we do archaeological digs, we do a bunch of prior call before you dig, because there's a lot of dangerous stuff underground, whether it be wires or gas lines. And actually, during COVID, 2 men went out somewhere in the Midwest. They went to dig on some property that they figured nobody was going to be paying attention to. They weren't archaeologists; they were just collectors. And they hit a bomb, and they both lost their lives. So it can be very dangerous. So this is why we do stuff like that.
Yeah, we take that stuff very serious.
Even with call before you dig, people put wires and pipes in places that they have no business putting them. At Prudence Crandall, we had no belief that there should be wires running out across the yard towards the fence line, and I'm about to hack through an electrical wire. I think it was dead, but glad we didn't find out.
Yeah.
I got to think that there were instances of finding unexploded ammo at Hammonasset Beach State Park, because that was a training facility as well during the war. Yeah, interesting stuff. Hey, how about most surprising theory to come from a dig or find? Most surprising theory. So something that helped shape a new approach towards a period or a place. A new approach, something that just came out of like left field. Oh my gosh, I didn't realize this.
Does it have to be a good theory?
No.
Okay. We were doing an excavation at the Webde Stevens Museum, and in one of our excavation blocks, we had a particular area that had wampum and King George farthings, and there was also a palisade wall that we were excavating, and one of our excavators theorized that the property was attacked when people were gambling, and the wall fell on them, so they left all their stuff behind. So
Not hear that one.
that was if Dave Wilson is out there waiting, I remember that.
Dave
I remember that one sustained us through the cold winter. It was very funny.
Any theories actually that ultimately became true would be good to hear about as well.
I mean, Scott mentioned before Brian Jones, who was always I'd call him a theoretician. I agree with you. He loved
ideas man.
He was an ideas man. He loved I'm a natural pessimist in the field. I always assumed the absolute most boring possible interpretation and then work up from there. Brian was the opposite. He was an optimist. He liked to go with the most wild interpretation you could think of and then work down, which is just different approaches. But they were always based in possibility. But it was always fun to see his mind work. I remember him suggesting at one site that perhaps the site was a dugout canoe production center, and that was based upon I don't know exactly what, but it was fun to see his mind work and thinking so differently from him. It was an uplifting sometimes.
Yeah, well, one of Brian's theories worked out wonderfully. He had done excavations with AHS at the Avon site, but he felt that we never found sea soil. So when we went back in 2019, where our expectation was to dig a bunch of sterile soil, and we found the oldest site in Connecticut. So some people have a knack for it. Brian definitely did.
Yeah, and I think that, I'm always, over the years, I would always listen to Brian and be like, yeah, that's really, interesting. I mean, there was always things there that I could work with, but I'm more like Bill. I'm like, it's not going to be that cool. It's just not. But then sometimes you're pleasantly surprised. I find that's a good way to get through life, because you're more likely to go up from there than down.
That's the philosophy, yeah.
But I think that, I think going back to what Scott was saying about the wampum production and this indigenous presence at Hollister, it was something that Brian always felt. And, now, I mean, the evidence for this is really beating us over the head. And I think we're really starting to think about the period in different ways. I mean, thinking about, the relationships between indigenous people and the English in 17th century Connecticut, which are complicated. It's very different than Massachusetts and Rhode Island. It's a very different landscape. The whole King Philip's War period, Connecticut weathered that in a very different way. And a lot of that had to do with relationships between Native people and colonists. So I think, it's really starting to make us think about the site and just kind of the history in different ways, or deeper ways, maybe.
One of the things that we've learned as resources are, stressed for everybody, and not often does one have as many resources as one would like. Citizen science is something that's important to you, where you're able to have eyes and ears and find data by people that are friendly to the mission and mandate of FOSA or of the Office of State Archaeology. Can you give an example, best example of citizen science coming to the rescue? Citizen science, somebody out there in an average Joe capacity or a fan of the science, but is not part of your respective outfits. Somebody coming in and helping out, and it's like, wow, that's really, really cool and helpful.
Yeah, I have one. As a matter of fact, it was Brian's first real big project once he came on. Nick Bellantoni had gotten a call, because everyone still calls Nick to this day, it seems like, because everyone knows him and has his number. Nick, if you're listening, thanks for taking all those calls for us. And had said they were this was down in the South Glastonbury area, and they were out with their son riding around on ATVs, and they noticed a big dark stain on some recently excavated project that they were putting in some drains, and they felt like it. They took a little closer look. There was a big ads there, and they felt we should go out, and we did. Unfortunately, for some reason, the project really hadn't been required to do any kind of an archaeological survey. And what had happened is, while they were putting this drain line in, they had cut through this huge feature, which looked like what was probably some kind of a structure, or at least a ceremonial landscape. There was a stone floor with a fire pit. We didn't have enough time or effort to kind of confirm that was, there were post holes all around it, although there were some. And then on the other side of the cut, there were 15 earth ovens. It was just very apparent that someone had dug a hole. They had put charcoal and stones down in there, had covered it back over. We spent, I had to be 2 or 3 weeks out there processing that. And, nice story about the terminal archaic period. We have some evidence of what they were cooking. So something that added to the story about what was going on that would otherwise just have been covered back over.
Yeah, very cool.
I think a really good example, and this will also give a plug to one of our archived episodes of the show, but is Jim Bailey, the metal detectorist, who basically put together the story of these Islamic 17th century coins that have been found across Connecticut, did a bunch of background research and tied them, to pirates in the 17th century, and, some of those guys coming back and settling in Connecticut after their marauding days were over, just to quiet lives, and bringing some of this coinage with them, and it kind of just getting integrated into the money of the colony. So I think that he really did a fantastic job pulling that story together, that research together, putting together his article, and I think that that story is going in different directions now, which is really exciting, I think.
You also did a show on underwater archaeology, and I remember vividly that there was a call to action out there that on our air. It's like, anybody that dives, anybody who snorkels, anybody, please send us a note, send us an email, because we're thirsty for more leads out there, because there's so much that lies under the water. Crazy. If you're just joining us on iCRV Radio, this is a superlative edition of Archaeology of Connecticut, where the state archaeologist Sarah Sportman is hosting an expanded roundtable. I don't think we can fit any more people around the roundtable. And we're going through the mosts and bests and worsts, and learning a little bit and honoring the hard work that you guys do. How about, because teaching is so important, and it can be difficult to do, but rewarding nonetheless. How about the best teaching moment as a teacher, the best moment, or you can take it a different way if you choose. You can be the best moment as a student, or so the best moment that you benefited from somebody just taking an interest in you, or sharing a story, or helping you, and you've kind of held on to that through your own personal journeys. So best moment as either a teacher or a student.
We should ask the professor.
Oh, yeah. I guess that's me. I don't have a single story for this. I was thinking a lot about this question, because obviously it spoke to me as a teacher, and I really see myself as a teacher primarily, and I love it more than anything. And so I don't have an explicit story, but I have a kind of collection of stories of students who I have had, some of them when I was a graduate student, some of them since I've been a professor, who I've had in classes, or I've had in field schools, or I've had in the lab, who have just been a person who was interested in archaeology, and then seeing them fall in love with this thing that we all love around this table, and then giving them just that little bit of knowledge they needed to run with that. And I've had a number of students go on to great graduate programs who have gone on to get graduate degrees or have gone to work in professional archaeology in one way or another. And then I see them at like a conference giving a paper on their own research, and that's a really satisfying feeling to see that, to see like, wow, I played a little role in that person's journey, and now they're off doing amazing stuff. So not a specific story, but kind of a collection. Yeah.
Yeah, Bill, I'd have to agree with that. For a couple summers, I helped do the kids' field school up at UConn with the Connecticut State Museum of Natural History. And there was one student, and I'm not going to take credit for his interest in archaeology, but I was just so pleased that not only did I see him in that program for kids, but then he did take an interest in archaeology, and he has volunteered for FOSA as well. So it's just nice to see somebody continue that interest.
Yeah, and to even take it out of the classroom or the field school, AHS, which Eric and I work for, we hire a lot of field techs right out of school, and they're interested in archaeology. Like, they want to do archaeology, and then as you start to work with them, they start to find their niche, and it's cliche, but there's a twinkle in their eye about what they're specifically interested in. Their eyes light up. And I actually had to tell one of our colleagues the other day to not apologize to me about what he was interested in, because he said, other people aren't interested in it. And I said, who cares? Like, you are excited about it, you're going to do something great with it. And it's great to see young archaeologists. I know Sarah dealt with me for years as one of those techs that wasn't quite sure what they wanted to do. So I don't know if that happened to me either. But yeah, it's been a really awesome experience.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Sarah.
Kat. Oh, no, I mean, it's all sort of building on the same thing that, Bill was saying, but I think it's been really cool now that I've been in this game for, let's say, almost 25 years, that, to have actually worked with a lot of students and younger archaeologists, and to see a lot of them come up through the field and develop and become professionals and get involved in different aspects of the field and academia and CRM and regulatory archaeology. But just to know that, that you were a part of kind of helping guide and shape somebody's career. I mean, obviously, wasn't just, they had lots of different teachers and mentors, but it's cool to see it all kind of come to fruition. And now we all have this like cabal where we can talk to each other.
Yeah, Sarah, I think you've mentored half this table.
Yeah, I was just going to say, we've got these kind of relationships right at this table. How many of us were Sarah's student at some point? And then I know that Eric and I worked with Mandy, and Mandy was one of our first crew chiefs. And I give Mandy a lot of credit for my experience as a field archaeologist and knowing how to do that work, which takes a lot of training. So,
aw, thanks, Bill.
Yeah.
Well, that's another thing that's
fuzzy here.
Yeah. That's another thing that's so great about archaeology. I could pick up my phone and text any person around this table or anybody that I can think of. It doesn't matter if they're, a more experienced colleague. It doesn't matter if I work with them or if I haven't spoken with them in years. If I send them a text or a picture of something and say, "What do you think about this?" they will respond. There won't be a question.
Mostly to the pictures of things that they're.
Mostly the pictures. You have to really include a picture, but yeah, I haven't worked a job before where everybody keeps in contact the same way.
Yeah, largely through artifact pictures, but whatever it takes.
Yeah, you all send me blurry pictures of seeds you find all the time.
It's like a more pointed Instagram, really.
Yes. I get pictures from Zach all the time. Is this human?
Yeah. It's kind of like, I will say the pictures of rocks and things are kind of like the equivalent of porn to archaeologists.
It's also a way to make everybody jealous.
It is. That's true, too.
iCRV.
I would take it just I would take it a little bit differently because, everyone around this table has some degree of kind of professional experience. But, most of the people that I work with are volunteers. They don't have a background. They didn't take this in school. They don't have a degree. So that's a very rewarding thing to take someone who shows up with the little curved garden trowel, and we have to tell them that's not the kind of trowels we use here, and to bring them in to show them some technique, and to get them to the point where they're confident enough. You'll see them now with someone maybe a little less experienced than them, kind of passing on kind of some of the technique and the process. And then the big win is when they feel comfortable enough to pick up the level form and start to fill it up. That's my goal with every student.
Paperwork I don't have to do.
Will they please do the level form?
I had a cute story with some of the kids at the Caesar Peters site, the middle school kids. They were digging in this couple quads, and these, I get the kids that are like, they don't want to get too dirty, they go really slow. Then you get the others that really go crazy, and they're like poking the trowel, and you're going, whoa, whoa, whoa. Well, the last time there were these two little girls, and they were digging, and they found a nail, and they were like, oh, this is cool. And then they found some pottery, like some ceramics, and I said, oh, that's great. And they're like, oh my God. And then the teacher says, come on, it's time to get on the bus. We have to go home. And they went, no, can't we stay, mister? Our moms will pick us up. They were like just so excited. It's really cute.
Yeah.
We mentioned before we had a question about the coolest and most exciting find, but this is slightly different, and so it doesn't have to involve a specific find, but the most interesting site that you were a part of, that you worked at, the most interesting site. And I lay this out as a way of trying to get around the state a little bit, so that we can get to some of these other and some of these. What I loved about one of the last programs that you did, Sarah, was that we learned of satisfying moments that weren't headlines. So I don't want a headline here. I just want a moment. Can you share a really cool site or project that you were part of that didn't necessarily break any theories here or make any headlines, but it was gratifying, the camaraderie perhaps, or just the work ethic, or I'll just put it to you guys.
I do have a cool site. Well, but was a little bit of a headline-y site. It's also not in Connecticut. It's in Massachusetts, and I know that's never on.
Well, you just can't talk about it.
Yeah,
then.
you can't. No, but one of the coolest sites I ever worked on, what I got to work on was Faneuil Hall in Boston when I was a grad student, master's student in Massachusetts, and we were subcontracted under a CRM firm. It was a really interesting project where the National Park Service was digging a new stairwell down into it. And if you're not aware, that part of Boston, that whole area, is all reclaimed land, which is to say that it used to be a part of the harbor, used to be underwater. And the way that they would reclaim that land is they would just fill it with trash over the course of decades and centuries. Sometimes even like scuttling ships out, and they're really neat. And they would just fill it with trash until it was land, and then they'd build buildings on it. That's how much of New York and Boston, a lot of big cities were built up. New Haven too. We were digging through just 10 feet. Weird, they're working in feet. 10 feet of 17th century trash. From like 1635 to 1650, and was all had to be wet screened because it was all pure clay. It was really dense, and we had to be in really fancy gear and safety gear. And the artifacts we found were incredible. We were finding coconut shells and seeds and stuff from West Africa. You could see the whole triangle trade, enslaved people basically present there, and the artifacts from stuff from Europe and stuff from Africa and stuff from the Caribbean and stuff from New England. It was just that was a very cool project, but it was low-key. We were only out there about 2 weeks, very fast, very quick. It was in the newspaper in the metro section for like a day. Ooh, cool archaeology dig, and that was it. And yet some of the things we found in that site were just unbelievable. So
very cool. Love that. Really cool. Good answer. Anybody else want to jump in?
Yeah, I have one. It was a small site in Rocky Hill. There was a little subdivision, and we went out and, again, Brian had a feeling based on a CRM firm that had done a job and found one really nice piece of chert. Brian had a feeling that was too nice to just be there randomly. And out we went, and we came across this area that was just loaded with chert. The most chert I've ever seen at a site. We were taking out pounds of it. But the really interesting part, the part that I found the most amazing is we were I was working with side by side with Dick Hughes, another FOSA volunteer, and we were coming down, and both of us kind of just realized from the sound of the trowel that we were hitting some kind of stone. It wasn't soil, and they were really super microscopic flakes, and so we stopped, we got our pictures, we did our drawings, took it down another level. They got slightly bigger. Same thing, pictures, everything. Down again, slightly chunkier. And by the time we were done, what we realized we had a spot, and Brian actually eventually put this data into a distribution diagram, and it created a perfect horseshoe with the center being where somebody sat, 5,000 years ago, right in that spot, and made a point from beginning to end, from a real big chunk of material all the way down to the little super serrating, sharpening flakes. You just don't, again, moment in time we talked about before. Wow. Usually you say a bunch of people were here and they made tools. To say a guy sat here and did it from beginning to end, it was kind of a unique thing for me anyway.
I love it. Anybody else?
Yeah, kind of piggybacking off that a little bit. One project that Steph also worked on actually was in Massachusetts in Bedford, and what was really cool about this site is, again, it didn't really make any headlines, but we were probably out there for, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 days, and we didn't excavate a huge area, but where we did, we just found, I would say, thousands of chert flakes. And what's really cool is that when we finally did get back to the lab, one of the report that I had to kind of write that summarized our findings, we had so much, material culture to sort of work with that we could do all these sorts of analyses. There's some indicators about how far stuff might have been transported and things like that. And if you only have a few artifacts, you can't really make heads or tails of much stuff. But because we had just so many individual artifacts, we could sort of see oh yeah, this is being, imported from XYZ, or this is, probably some sort of failed hunting camp or something like that. And it's just one of those things that's just amazing, especially too, because we only found 3 projectile points there, I think. And they weren't really super, diagnostic temporally or anything like that. But in terms of the behavioral data that we got from it, it's just really incredible.
Wow, love that. Hey, fastest hour in internet radios right here. You heard it here first. We've talked about bombs and bears and wampum and palisades, and I've got a boatload more questions. So maybe we do a second edition of this thing sometime in 2023.
You can do that.
And we'll between now and then, we'll find more microphones.
All right. We have a couple more volunteers if we can find more mics.
We will do that. But can we just go around the table so that you can give any contact information that you want to give, so that people know how they can find and follow you, and so that we can keep next generation scientists and archaeologists, keep that pipeline fueled and well. All right?
So again, I'm Stephanie Scialo. I'm a doctoral student at the University of Connecticut. I'm also a research associate at the Institute for American Indian Studies in Washington, Connecticut, so I can be found through either of those outlets.
Cool. Yeah. So again, I'm Dr. Bill Farley from Southern Connecticut State University, but I was on the show a few weeks ago, so you can find me on YouTube at Video Game Archaeology or Twitter at Archaeology Game if you want to see some public-facing educational stuff that I like to make. So check that out.
Again, Dr. Eric Heffter, senior archaeologist at Archaeological and Historical Services Incorporated, and don't really have much of a social media presence, but best bet would probably be to go to AHS's company website, and you can see some of the previous projects that the company has worked on.
And I'm Mandy Ranslow. I am at the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation. You can Google me there for all your Section 106 questions.
As always, you can check out the Office of State Archaeology on Facebook and Instagram, and our website, osa.uconn.edu.
FOSA, we're on Facebook, and you can get us at fosa-ct.org.
We love what you guys do. Thanks for sharing your passion and your stories, and we look forward to seeing you around the round table sometime soon again. Be well.
Thank you.